Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, I have the pleasure of being joined by Pastor McCreepy. I'm sure you'll love his voice as much as I do. So make yourself comfortable to let the darkness take control. When I was younger, my family owned an RV. We kept it parked at the back of our driveway most days, with the front facing the street. One night, I was home alone watching a movie on Netflix. When I looked out the window, there was a police cruiser and a K-9 officer patrolling outside my house. For some reason, I decided it was a good idea to open the front door and ask the officer what was happening, but I got shut down and told to stay inside. Fast forward 30 minutes. I'm scared out of my wits. I'm sitting alone in my living room, and the police have now left. Despite this fact, I make the decision to try and sleep. Earlier I left the light on outside, and as I passed the window, I realize this. I go to walk away, but do a second take. I see something on the roof of our RV. Something like a bag or a lump. Upon closer inspection, it's a person. There's an actual person laying on the top of our RV. I call the police, and I get them back to my house. The man gets arrested, but not without yelling, "I'll kill that kid," before getting shoved into the back of the cruiser. I was never in any immediate danger, and I've moved since. But it still freaked me out as a kid.
So, at my first job, I had a coworker named Jay, who lived in India, and I lived in the US. In the beginning, I didn't know anything about him, except that he's really good at his job, and in the future, I'll be working with him a lot after I finish my training. We outsource half of our team to India, so it was normal to interact with them on a daily basis. Since we were a huge corporation, our jobs are in high demand, and we have a rotating on-call schedule. Almost a year into my job, sometime in 2015, Jay was approved to visit the US on a work visa for about 6 months. During those 6 months, I didn't really talk to him much. He seemed really shy. I didn't really think much about it. Around that 6-month time period, my boyfriend proposed to me, and of course I said yes. The entire team congratulated me, including him. Then, when it was time for him to go, I wished him goodbye. Didn't really give him much attention, or even remember much of my interactions with him. Fast forward to 3 or 4 months later, sometime early 2016, I finally was assigned a project, and Jay was the project lead. I messaged him a few times, asking him a few questions, and he always answered my emails or messages fairly quickly. I appreciated his help and told him that multiple times. So one weekend night, I was assigned to launch one of his codes. Since it took a long time and it was a quiet night, we decided to chat over IM. He seems like a pretty cool guy, actually. We talked about the differences in US and Indian culture. We talked about mine and his college days, sports, politics, etc. I thought he was chill, and daily we would IM each other about work and non-work related stuff. Since he knew I was engaged, I told him about my wedding preparations, stuff about my fiancé, mine and my fiancé's family, my bridesmaids, etc. We gradually moved to texting every now and then. It got to a point where he knew quite a few things about me, and I didn't see any problem with it. Soon, Jay started doing things that I didn't find alarming at first. If I was busy and didn't answer his messages, he'd send multiple messages at a time until I answered. He asked a lot of questions about my personal life, habits, family members, and friends. It did bother me a little bit, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal. It got worse later. I was close to another guy coworker named Raj. Jay would sometimes talk crap about Raj, but I found out later that Jay was jealous of Raj because Raj and I were really close. Jay later on revealed to me that when he visited the US and met me, he was so intrigued that sometimes he used to follow me around. During lunch hours, I used to go out with some other coworkers, and apparently he'd see me outside and occasionally follow me. He thought this was normal. This was stalking pretty much. I was really creeped out. I soon stopped answering most of his texts and was extremely short with him. Jay got really desperate and later on confessed his feelings for me and told me to marry him instead and how he'd treat me better than my future husband ever will. My fiancé and I were long distance during our engagement, but I eventually visited him and told him everything that had happened. My fiancé was obviously pissed, but I told him I'll handle it. I told Jay to forget about any idea of me and him ever being together. Jay wanted to fix things so badly, so this is what he did. Jay decided to fly to the US a month before my wedding to pretty much convince me to call off the wedding. My boss and Jay are extremely close, so Jay made some good excuses on why he should be in the US for some projects. My boss agreed, and here Jay was. Oh my god, things were so awkward after that. Remember Raj? Well, apparently Jay gave Raj hell for being my friend. He berated me and Raj for being too close and pretty much accused me of having an affair with Raj. He followed me all the time, tracking my IM status, texting me constantly, begging me to give him chances. It got to the point where I yelled at him a few times to leave me alone. He would do things like grab my hand and arms while I was talking to him, and I started threatening that I would report him if he did anything more. Eventually he got the message, but that didn't mean he left me alone. He started writing emails to me about all the mistakes I've been doing in my projects and would CC my team. My boss didn't really have my support because Jay and he were really close. Raj confided that Jay would still disparage him during meetings, pretty much making his life hell. I finally got married, and Jay congratulated me, but still would try to message me in hopes that I would be friends with him again. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to report everything he did to HR. My HR rep didn't exactly make this process easy for me. Lots of times when I told her the story, she turned it around and told me that I encouraged him to harass me by acting a certain way, or allowing him to text me, or being friendly to him outside work. I decided to quit the company and move to another job. At times, Jay would try to hit me up, but I started blocking him. He tried Google Hangouts, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. I started blocking him on all social platforms. I blocked him on everything and hope he never tries to contact me again. So Jay, let's not meet.
This happened not long ago, and still gives me the chills to this day. Me and my friend were driving along an empty road. We were driving home from a wedding, and my friend was the designated driver. It was pretty late, and the road was pitch black. We were getting close to the nearest town, when I see the outline of someone laying on the road. Luckily, my friend managed to swerve and we stopped across from the figure. We were debating whether to get out of the car, when the figure jolted up and looked around and spotted the car. He started to speed right to our car and began banging on the window. "Open the door! I only want to say hi." Luckily, we had the doors locked and sped away. Who knows what he wanted?
As a college freshman, I had a class with this guy that was a bit odd, but seemed nice enough. I've never been the kind of person to be rude to people just because they're weird, so I would chat with him before class started as he sat right in front of me. I didn't really think anything of the fact that no one else talked to him. Maybe it was for a reason, or maybe they're just mean. It progressed from him just talking to me before class to him kind of trailing behind me when I walked out of the class back to my dorm. Again, sort of weird, but whatever. He eventually started catching up with me and talking with me all the way from class to my dorm, which is a whole 15-minute walk out of his way. I never asked him to, and he also never asked me, so I started to feel a little bit weirded out. The more he clung to me, the more I kind of gently broke off from him because I didn't want him to get the wrong idea. He added me on Facebook and messaged me constantly, inviting me places every weekend, even though I politely declined each and every time. and started just sort of popping up everywhere I went on campus, it felt like. I pointed him out to my friends, and they also recognized him and swore that when I wasn't looking, he would be staring at me intensely. It was like his eyes were burrowing into my skull. He would never directly approach me when I was with my friends, but I had just the worst gut feeling of dread. Maybe I'm just mean, but once the semester ended, I stopped talking to him altogether because something about his quiet persistence made me feel genuinely unsettled. He eventually deleted me off of Facebook after I didn't open his messages for a few weeks. Fast forward a semester, and I'm sitting by myself on a bench with my headphones in. I immediately spotted him walking towards me, and my brain was going, oh no. He finally reaches me, and this man says, "Excuse me, but have we met somewhere before?" I was obviously confused and almost mad, so I said, "Yeah, we had a class together fall semester." He went on about how he didn't recall me being in that class at all, and a few minutes later, went away. I don't know why this creeped me out so much, but something about his insistence that he had no clue who I was really bothered me, because we had spent weeks following me around and interacting with me. Flash forward to now, a year after my class with him. I know for a fact that he's a history major, and I am a behavioral healthcare major. Other than the prereq we had together, our paths in terms of classes should never intersect. However, he has begun to appear outside of my first class on Mondays. The area my class is in is exclusively for behavioral healthcare classes and is about a mile away from the center of campus, where everyone hangs out. He never says anything to me or gets up from the bench. He just stares at me. How does he know where my class is? How does he know what time it ends? Where is he going to show up next? My apartment? Maybe it's not that serious, but I'm genuinely really freaked out. So, old friend, let's not meet.
This happened to me when I was 4 or 5, and my family was staying at my grandparents' house over a vacation weekend. My sister and I slept in their guest office/room, where they had a phone. One night at about 11:30, the phone rang, waking me up. My sister was still asleep, but I got up to answer it to make it stop ringing. When I picked up the phone, there was a man on the other end. I remember he sounded nice and not creepy at all. I asked him who he was and if he wanted one of my grandparents. He said he wasn't calling for my grandparents, and that his name was something that I vaguely remember and started with an R. He then asked who I was, and I stupidly told him my name. He asked how old I was and which grade I was in. I told him that I was 4 and that I go to preschool. I realize now how stupid it was for me to tell him this, but I was a very honest child. Then he asked, "Where do you live?" I told him I didn't really know, but he asked me to describe the area. So I talked about the church down the road and a nearby school that had a bulldog on the sign. I even told him what the name of my neighborhood that my grandparents lived in was. I then asked him why he wanted to know, and he responded, "So I can visit you." It was then that my mum's then boyfriend must have heard me talking in the room and checked to see what was going on. When he saw I was on the phone, he immediately took it from me. I remember he was angry talking to the guy on the phone and told him not to call this number again. I just stood there, realizing that I did something I wasn't supposed to. I was told to go back to bed and to not answer the phone again. The next day, my mum sat me down and explained to me what stranger danger was, and that at the time, I still didn't fully understand why the phone call was such a big deal. But years later, I understand the implications for the whole interaction, and I get chills from it. I'm thankful that I was stopped before it could go on any further.
I was 23 years old, in grad school, working towards my MLIS and working part-time at the West Valley Library. I wasn't paid much at the West Valley, so I applied for a position at the larger Stone River Library System and was hired there. The new position required me to work hours at the Crestmont and Cherry Lane branches, but I continued working at West Valley too. My first shift with Stone River Library System was a Monday night at the Cherry Lane branch. I didn't need much training because I was already familiar with the software they used and working with the public, but one of my new coworkers was explaining some of the unique policies this library had when a patron came up and asked where he could find books about World War II. My coworker asked if I could handle the question, and I said I could. Before the coworker walked away, he jokingly said to the patron, "Take it easy on her, she's new." The patron was heavy-set and looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I told him he'd want to look at the 940s in the adult non-fiction section, and he wandered away. But several minutes later, he came back. He said he was having trouble finding the section, and that maybe I could help him find the specific book he wanted. I started searching our system for the title he requested. He then introduced himself to me as Jim and extended his hand over the desk to shake mine. I awkwardly shook his hand and went back to searching for the book. He was acting overly familiar with me, and he was very talkative, telling me all about himself. Patrons being overly familiar and talkative isn't really unusual in public libraries. Often, people come to the library just to have someone to talk to, so we're conditioned to listen to people talk as we work, as long as it doesn't interfere with providing assistance to other patrons. We didn't own the title he was looking for, but I told him I could place a hold on it and have it sent here from another library. I placed the hold and told him he would get a phone call when the book arrived here for him. He then told me that the phone number on his account was his home number, but he would prefer that we call his cell phone. I offered to change the phone numbers for notifications to his cell phone number. He said he didn't want to do that because his wife once calls about her books at home. He then suggested that instead I could take his cell phone number and call him personally when the book arrives. This was a really strange request. I told him I couldn't do that because I don't handle the items arriving from other libraries, and I'm only here very part-time hours. He attempted a sad puppy dog face and said, "Come on, please, for me?" I told him the best I could do was change the phone number on his account to a cell phone. He declined and didn't press the issue any further. He then asked if I could show him to the 940s in adult nonfiction. I walked across the library to the 940 section with him. I don't remember our exact conversation in the stacks, but he was clearly trying to flirt with me, and at some point he said something along the lines, "You look so young, but you seem to really know what you're doing. It's hard to believe you're new here." I told him that I'm new to this library system, but I've worked at another library nearby for several months, and I also work at another branch of this library system. He then dropped all pretense of looking for World War II books and started grilling me with personal questions. I sidestepped the questions as best as I could, and completely made up a few things that I did tell him, but I've always had trouble politely disengaging from uncomfortable conversations like this. After about 15 minutes, I told him that the library was really busy tonight, and I needed to get back to the circulation desk. As I turned to walk out the aisle, he grabbed my wrist to stop me, held it very tightly, and said, "You should give me your number." I was completely shaken that he had touched me, and I wasn't concerned about being polite anymore. I semi-screamed, "No, I'm not interested," and yanked my arm out of his grasp. I power walked up to the circulation desk and into the staff room, where I then got chewed out from the supervisor on duty for disappearing for almost 20 minutes. By the time my chat with the supervisor was over, Jim had left the library. I quickly went back to the computer where I placed a hold for him, opened the transaction log, and opened his library account from there. I wrote down his card number, his full name, and his address. The next day was the first day to work at the Crestmont branch. It was uneventful. Thursday, I worked at the Crestmont branch again. When I arrived, the supervisor told me that someone had called looking for me on Wednesday, but didn't want to leave a message. I had no idea who it could have been and shrugged it off. Later that day, a coworker told me there was someone on the phone for me. I picked up the call. It was Jim. He said he was just calling to talk. This had the hair on the back of my neck standing up, because I realized that he must have been the person who called looking for me yesterday. I told him that I can't just talk to people on the phone while I'm at work, and not to call here again. He said if I gave him my cell phone number, he could call me when I'm not at work, and we could talk. I told him again that I am not interested, and hung up the phone. The supervisor overheard this. I explained what had happened at the Cherry Lane branch, and she wrote up an incident report about everything, which she sent to the director of SRLS and the supervisors at all 4 branches. Friday afternoon, the director of SRLS called me at home. He told me that Jim had apparently called all 4 SRLS branches on Wednesday and showed up at one branch trying to find me and asking where and when I would be working next. The director emailed me a letter, drafted by SRLS's lawyer, that he planned to send to Jim and asked me to read it over to make sure everything was accurate. The letter summarized the incidents from Cherry Lane on Monday and Crestmont on Thursday, warned Jim that library patrons are not permitted to interfere with library employees while she is performing her duties, and went on to say, if it were not apparent from the employee's tone of voice, I want to make it clear that your personal attention directed at her is unwanted. It is expected that you will not continue to seek out interactions with this employee. All future interactions you have with library employees will be based upon library services and will not become personal. Failure to comply with this warning will result in you being banned from the Stone River Library system for a period of time commensurate with your misconduct. I told the director that I thought this might be a little bit harsh because I could just be overreacting about the whole situation, but he said that everything about Jim's interactions with me had been inappropriate and he wanted to stop this in its tracks. I agreed he should send the letter. On Sunday, I worked at the West Valley Library. Shortly after the library opened, I answered a phone call, and it was Jim. I was shocked and scared because I never told him that I worked at this library. He said he really wanted to see me, and that if I wouldn't talk on the phone, he would come to the library and we could talk in person. I wanted to be completely clear, so I told him that I was sorry if I gave him the wrong impression, but I'm not interested in talking to him on the phone, or in person, or ever again at all. He started saying things like, I thought you were a good person. You seem so nice. You shouldn't treat me like this. I said I have to go, and hung up the phone. A coworker who had overheard the conversation convinced me to file a police report, just in case. The police arrived shortly after that, and I sat down with them and went over everything. They told me they were going to stop by Jim's house the next day to speak with him about the situation and see where things stand, and that if I see him following me anywhere, I should call 911 immediately. Monday night, I worked at the Cherry Lane branch again. I was kind of nervous that Jim might come in, since he knew I would be working there, and because he had probably just received a warning letter from my boss and a visit from the police. But he never showed up. My coworkers and I walked to the staff parking lot together after closing, and as we approached our cars, I saw that my car's hood was popped. When we got closer, I saw that all 4 windows, plus the front and rear windshield, had been smashed in. There were also dozens of deep dents to the metal panels, and cracks and holes punched through the bumpers and other plastic sections of my car. Inside, it looked like someone had poured bleach all over the black cloth seats. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my legs stopped supporting me. I collapsed onto the blacktop, and I immediately threw up. This is the first and only time in my life I've experienced actual panic. My coworkers hoisted me back up and half ran, half dragged me back into the library, where they called 911. When the police arrived, I told them about Jim. They located Jim's car several blocks away, and inside it they found empty bleach containers, a hammer, and a full set of his clothing: shoes, socks, pants, underwear, and a shirt and a sweater. When they visited his house, his wife told the police that he was at a local bar watching a football game. The police were never able to locate Jim, and as far as I understand, he never returned to his house or his wife. I didn't stick around to find out, though. Over the next 2 days, I quit both of my jobs, dropped out of school, broke my apartment lease, and moved several 100 miles away. But now I carry pepper spray. I'm a black belt in karate, and I don't run from threats anymore. So Jim, let's meet up.
This happened to me 2 summers ago, and I had pretty much forgotten about it until I found this subreddit. I was at a grocery store on a weeknight around 8 p.m. This is a grocery store I shop at all the time. And while in a very urban area with some crime and odd people, nothing had ever really happened to me here other than catcalling. While I'm ringing out in self-checkout, a man in probably his mid to late 20s comes up to me. He says hi, and that his name is Mike, and shakes my hand, and asks for my name. I give him a fake one, and let him keep talking. He starts telling me about how he loves art, and thinks I'd be a beautiful model. He says he specializes in gore, and takes photos, and makes movies of girls with their guts and brains hanging out, and likes to make them more unique. He tells me he'd love for me to star in one of his movies. He wanted to see what I looked like in front of the camera, with my guts spilling out, while looking scared. The entire time, I'm just standing there petrified. Who says that to someone? The store was busy, and while some people looked over at us, no one was really close enough to hear. Eventually, I just say no thank you a few times, and he says that it was great to meet me and hopes to see me around. After he walks away, I grab my bag and bolt to my car. I'm lucky that I only had a few things, so I didn't have to take time to pack it into my trunk. I had checked my back seats and under my car, and didn't see him anywhere, so I took off. My roommate wasn't home, so I spent the next 2 nights at my boyfriend's, but still too terrified to sleep. I haven't seen him since, and thank God for that.
I was visiting a family overseas, in a wonderful, neutral country. Their flag is a huge plus, and was waiting for a tram with my mom on the first day I was there. I was extremely jet-lagged and tired, having landed at 9 a.m. local time after barely sleeping on the flight and train ride over. I wasn't at my best mental functional level, but it's best to power through and try to acclimate to the new time zone as soon as possible. After a few minutes of me swaying in place with exhaustion, a man in his late 20s or early 30s strode purposefully up to me and asked, "Are you a man or a woman?" Well, that's nice, but due to my fatigue state, my brain farted out, "Personal interaction, beep bop yay." I stupidly entertained him and respond that I was a woman. Overjoyed, the man babbled at me in a mix of English and French throughout the wait, and then got on the tram with us, and I nodded and looked anywhere but at him. For the first time in my existence on this earth, my mother had nothing to say, or anything nasty to interject, so I was unsupported and uncomfortable. In a single breath, this guy told me his name, Omar, said he was from Morocco, asked for my phone number, and said he was losing himself in my green eyes. Ever helpful and caring, my mom finally jumps in and proceeds to give him my number. I stare at her in horror while he dials it in and then turns on me angrily, saying it doesn't work. Well, you didn't use the country code. It's an American number. In any case, just wait and call it in 5 days when I'm 4,000 miles away from you. He says he's going to whatever place a few stops away, so I drag my once again silent and useless mom off the tram at the next stop. Not before I got a big hug and a kiss on every available surface of my face, along with a "I will see you soon." Great, can't wait. My mom offers me nothing in the way of apology or any sort of response at all, so I forget about it, and the rest of the visit goes uneventfully. Once I'm back in the US, I find that he somehow found my Facebook. My number is not in any way linked with it that I could find, but maybe I missed something. I don't accept his request, but that doesn't stop him from messaging me multiple times daily with what I assume are attempts at poetry, all revolving around my eyes. Interspersed between these declarations, suggesting his likely eventful harvest of my eyeballs, he adds me to multiple group chats that are all in Arabic. I can neither speak nor read Arabic. Eventually, I'm in like 15 different Arabic group chats, and I have no idea what's going on, as Google Translate was no more understandable than the chats themselves. I hadn't blocked him yet, because like a car crash, I couldn't look away. Finally, I messaged him back to say that he seems nice, but I'd like to keep my eyeballs in my face, and I'm sure he'll find a nice, lovely girl to harvest parts from in the future. Before I block him, I get a last plea. My love is in your eyes. Please let me gaze upon you again and hold them forever. Super romantic. Definitely not grade A Buffalo Bill in the making, but not enough to make me feel any less secure in my decision to block him and change my number. I've visited overseas a number of times since and have not seen him. So let's keep this up, Omar, and not meet again.
About 2 years ago, my significant other and one of his friends decided to utilize a nice, somewhat warm day to go fill up the tires on the motorcycle and kind of just cruise around. We set off, deciding on a nearby gas station that has an air pump on the side of the building. The lane with the pump also has a large parking lot opposite the building for reference. We pull in, both motorcycles parked next to the pump, and what appears to be a homeless man approached and was standing near me, making comments about the bikes. No big deal, we're used to having people ask questions, or older crowds share their stories of back when they used to ride, and we love hearing these stories. This man was different and scared me to the bone. I'm a small-framed female, so I made a point to try and keep moving away from him, but he kept standing close. Our friend was agitated, and my boyfriend was baffled by some of the man's comments, which started off innocent, such as, "Oh man, I love motorcycles. I would love to go on a ride with you." But then they changed to, "Why don't you drop that hooker back off at the corner, and we can go for a ride?" What? There were multiple comments made about me being a hooker. My boyfriend is a very even-tempered guy, but his friend is not. The situation escalated to where I think the man was attempting to touch the motorcycles, and my boyfriend's friend ends up yelling at the guy, who then ran across the bare parking lot and into the alley. We didn't want to take off because we were heading that way, and slightly scared the man would try and do something as we rode by. My boyfriend's friend and I walked to the edge of the alley and looked towards the way the man went, and find him running in circles, yelling incoherently in the middle of the alley. We went in the other direction.
One summer, long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises, preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants/workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met the customers, transported materials, etc., aka my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make more money, while depriving me even further of the will to live. So I had to hire people who were in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company, and so had no option but to work with us. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran, about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic, but had impressed me over the phone, as I was essentially painting entire houses myself, or with a skeleton crew, until I could scrounge up more workers. I didn't interview him in person, just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and the crew at the new job site 9 a.m. Monday. Life happens as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them, explaining them to help Jim get used to the way we worked, and make sure to keep it basic. If he was having trouble, send him home and he'd start over with me there the next day. 9:45 a.m. My phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm at awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I'm staring at a dead family member and, you know this, now, what? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? He's fucking insane. He's ruining this person's roof, and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part, since my crew spent more time talking than painting. But I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a half-pipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down and send him home. I'll deal with him after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize, and tell him he could bring his cousin Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job, but doesn't consult me. Says it's fine, and I have to deal. Great. New job site, new day. I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery. A jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and deferent. I had asked to speak to him alone before I let him set foot on the job site, and he was completely upfront about the jail time and what led to it, answering any questions I had had. I was convinced, and he did an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever, and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on the job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of mom, pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interactions, with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through to reach one ridiculously small but very high piece. Sure, fine. Halfway through the job, I showed up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar furtively look at him, then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I love me some drama. Don't care about anything anymore, so I do. Oscar sprints to my car and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and the daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss had been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them privately to wait until the day I came, and he would make sure I talked to them. I thanked Oscar, told him that I would deal with it right then, and requested he hang around and proceed as if everything is fine, in case I needed his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic mother. The family was Russian, so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest made me think Red from OITNB found out I didn't like her food. Apparently, Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder position as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line of pedophilia, but a freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate, sexual innuendos, the works. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor and promise them that this will be dealt with immediately. With that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask Jim if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and after he hands it over, I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, zoomed in, etc. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down and screaming at me. He launches at me, and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. Police were called, and I handed the phone over, was interviewed. Poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great. I finished the job with Oscar. We get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes, and I'm home watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its brights on. I don't care. I continue watching TV. A few minutes pass, and I hear yelling from the neighbor's house. I look out the window, and it's Jim's car in their driveway. Because my boss had given him my home address as where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors, wondering where I was, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiotic, slack-jaw face staring out the window about 6 feet away. Then he pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I can register this is actually happening, or grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something, my living room is filled with red and blue lights as multiple police cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15 and another a shotgun. He apparently had only taken one out to wave over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. My neighbors are elderly, nosy, snarky, and call the cops on any and everything of little or no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life. Jim, let's not meet again. Also, you suck at painting.
My ex and I lived in a brand new subdivision. It was 2 houses, an unfinished house and vacant lots. One area was far from our house, and nearly in the woods. Late one night, maybe 2 or so in the morning, the doorbell rings, and rings, and rings. Finally getting annoyed and worried about our newborn waking up, me and my ex answer the door. There's a couple, a man and a woman standing there. They say they've broken down and need some help. They're all the way in the back of the lot. My ex is not the smartest guy, but also an auto mechanic, so he decides to help them. I tell him it seems weird. He doesn't listen, so I do the next best thing and tell him I'll drive over, leaving the baby in the house. I wait in the truck while he checks it out. They keep insisting he get under the car, under the dashboard, all sorts of weird stuff that would make him prone and easily attacked. My ex keeps telling them that he can't because he's huge. He's nearly 7 foot tall and 350 pounds. He simply doesn't fit. So he comes back to me and says now it seems weird. He's finding nothing wrong. He gets in the truck and we dial 911 and tell them we're calling a wrecker. We see these 2 people go running off into the woods, and so we lock ourselves in our house until the cops show up. The cops check out the scene and find the 2 people not hiding well due to serious amounts of drugs they're on, and realize the car is stolen. I'm positive they would have brained my ex, and given a chance, robbed the house. So 2 drugheads, please stay in prison, and let's not meet.
I decided to backpack across Russia after college by myself, ever since I was an exchange student in college to China, not far from the Russian border. I'd always wanted to ride the Trans-Siberian Railway, so at age 22, I find myself riding the longest train ride in the world. 6 days from Moscow to Vladivostok. I spoke no Russian. I knew no one in and nothing about Vladivostok, since I had backpacked across China previously, and usually had had no problems finding accommodations in new cities at any hour of the day when I was there. I figured, how hard could it be to just land there and find my way around? In my train car, I made an acquaintance of a young couple who were from Vladivostok. Katie was a thin, petite brunette who worked as a scientist, vaguely similar to Bjork in appearance, and told me She was of partial gypsy ancestry. She was 27. Her husband, Vlad, was a big bruiser of a guy, in his mid-40s, with chipped front teeth and scars on his face, who had been a professional Russian soccer player. Only Katie spoke English, so it didn't seem out of place to me that she seemed much more interested in talking to me than Vlad did. Still, there were times when I got a strange, vaguely hostile vibe from Vlad. Also, I chalked this up to language and culture differences at the time. But it did strike me in passing as odd that Katie seemed to be enjoying talking to me, in a way, and with a frequency that I would have expected her to be talking to her significant other, rather than a man she just met. She got surprisingly personal with me. I learned that this was her second marriage, and that she was the type of person to never show her anger to someone who had wronged her, but never forget to forgive either. Again, I didn't think much of it. When we reached Vladivostok, Katie and Vlad were much taken aback to hear that I didn't have any preset accommodations and didn't know anyone there. They were not at all keen on my plan of just wandering around the city for a place to stay. It's a crime-ridden city, they warned, and the few hotels there are quite expensive. No, I just had to come stay with them for the 4 days until my train left for Harbin, China. They apparently lived with Katie's mother, whom Katie told me would be happy to cook for me and would be delighted to meet someone from so far away. At this point, nothing felt off. I found Russians, in general, to be frosty on the surface, but with even a little bit of persistence, they open up and can be among the most warm and hospitable people anywhere. Katie lived with her parents, and Katie's sister and young niece, in a drab but spacious old Soviet housing block. There were always people around, and all of Katie's family and friends seemed intrigued to meet an American guy. My presence there was definitely the talk of the neighborhood. Over the next 2 days, all sorts of people came over to try and practice their English with me, and the food and drink flowed. This was helped by the fact that Katie seemed overly eager to be in my presence and translate for me at every turn. One night, she showed me a Russian cartoon movie she loved as a child, and sat next to me through the whole movie, translating it line by line for me. I woke up the day my train was supposed to leave, and the apartment was surprisingly quiet for the first time. I got dressed and walked around. I soon found the only person in the apartment was Katie. She was lounging in a chair in the living room, the TV on in front of her. She had on only a thin silk robe that barely covered her, and had her legs spread wide apart. She looked at me and said hi in barely a whisper, and had a look on her face that was absolutely neutral. I just stood there, slack-jawed and very nervous, not knowing quite how to proceed. I was a fairly sheltered and innocent kid, with less than amazing social skills, but at the same time, I was very much an adult male. It sure looked as if she was offering herself to me, but not entirely unambiguously. I couldn't shake the very real consideration that making a move on her could be disastrous, especially if I was seeing something that wasn't really there. She could, after all, just be scantily dressed because she forgot there was someone else in the house. But before I could resolve this dilemma, the front door opened loudly. It was Vlad. Katie gave a start, pulled her robe together, and said something surprised to him in Russian. He replied, and though I didn't understand him, he seemed to have an edge to his voice that sent a chill through me. While they talked, I took the opportunity to wander into the bedroom they had loaned me and do some reading just to distract myself. Katie dropped me at the train station by herself that evening and seemed truly sad to see me go, though she did say one thing that bothered me and seemed out of place. You're like a child." She then kissed me on the cheek and bid me goodbye. It's been 16 years since this happened, and I've thought about it every now and then. I shudder to think what might have happened to me if I had woken up that day, thinking and acting much more instinctively. Also, was that whole situation a trap that I narrowly missed stepping in? It felt just too planned, the way that there was no one else in the apartment except for Katie, and that Vlad came back just at the time he did. Katie and Vlad, let's not meet again.
So to preface this, I live in LA, in an area right on the cusp of being dangerous in my opinion. I had just gotten off work on Halloween at about 3 a.m. and me and my brother decide to go to 7-Eleven for some snacks and candy so that we could somewhat celebrate a Halloween spent working. We get there, and there is a visibly drunk guy idling by the door, who turns to us and smiles, and then opens the door for us and insists we go in. We say thanks and walk in. The cashier, who knows me and my brother by name, and I've never seen yell, is incessantly eyeing this guy as he goes to the cold drink aisle. I don't know what he was doing as we're looking at the candy, but the cashier starts yelling at him, telling him to get out. The guy doesn't leave, and the cashier goes to call the cops. This is when the guy starts roaming around the store and eventually stops next to me and starts asking me how my night was going, with both of his hands in his pockets. I tell him fine, and he starts getting closer to me, at an angle where he's almost out of my peripherals, behind me, and every time I pivot to keep him in view, he moves again. Then I fully turn to him and he says, "You know Mein Kampf, my dude?" And I say, "Yeah, I know what it is." This I assume he interprets while drunk as I've read it. Then he asks me, "You German man? You for the Führer?" And I say, "Nah." Then he goes, "You want to die tonight, man? I'm ready to die tonight, man. It's been a good night." Which he says while getting really close to me. I tell him to back off, and he gets real offended, saying he's just having a conversation. I quickly walked away from him and left when my brother was done buying his food. Luckily, the cops arrived right after we left, and the guy could see us walk in the direction of our home, which was a block away.
I work at a restaurant, and I love all the people I work with. Well, except one. The dishwasher, Jamal, is not my favorite. When I first started working there, I was one of 2 white girls. I say this because after this incident, my boss told me that incidents similar to mine have occurred, but only with the younger white females. They've had to fire a good amount of people because of it, I guess. Also, these comments and gestures only happened to me and the other girl. Anyway, the cooks would flirt harmlessly and try to get things for me and help me. Jamal would flirt, but it would make my blood run cold. I would make small talk when I brought dishes back, and he seemed okay. I couldn't tell if he had an intellectual disability or if he just naturally mumbled his words. I could make out about 50% of what he was trying to say. Well, after about 3 weeks of working there, I'm bringing dishes back. If there are crates above the station, then you can't really see unless you look through the cracks of the grate. I looked through to try and see if the silverware was done. As I looked through, he moved right in my line of sight. He stared me dead in the eyes and started putting his tongue out and wiggling it like a snake. I was so creeped out. I couldn't tell anyone because when I thought of how to explain it, it sounded funny or like a joke. I could tell it wasn't though. This went on for about 3 months, until yesterday. I was getting ready to leave work and was saying bye to my friend Derek, who was working the dish pit with Jamal. Derek tends to flirt with me a lot, and just like that, Jamal was able to clearly pronounce his words. He said, "Hey, would you be able to get me something?" Didn't think it was odd, except for the fact that he has never spoken clearly before. Ever. But I said, "Sure," because most of the time, dishwashers will ask one of us for a drink or something. He asked for a root beer float, and I'm thinking, kind of a weird request. Also, I really don't want to make that. I say, "A root beer float?" in a confused way. He then looks me dead in the eyes, as he creepily does every day, and says, "Yeah, a root beer float, but with you on top." I kind of laugh, more like, what the heck? Derek is giving a very confused look. Then Jamal says, "You you on top with your legs spread wide open, and does the tongue thing, and then says, "I think about it every time I see you." And Derek is now like, "What the heck? That is creepy, stop messing." And then Derek took his apron off and came out and kinda pushed me out of the kitchen. He asked me if I wanted him to get our manager. I said no, because I really did not want to tell my 6'4", like 275-pound boss this, and probably start crying. Derek told me he would talk to him right after he walked me to my car, and thank God he did. Jamal had left through the back and was smoking by the dumpster, trying to act casual. But when he saw Derek with me, he said something. But again, he mumbles, so no idea what he said. But he threw his barely lit cigarette on the ground and walked back inside. Derek talked to our manager, and they are going to talk to the general managers, because he's the one that makes the decision to fire someone. Derek basically told my boss to fire him. My boss called me to check on me and gave me the next 3 days off. So Jamal, I hope I won't see you again.
This happened about 8 years ago in Germany. My daughters were 4 and 2.5. It was a very nice morning, so I decided to take my girls to a little mall and walk around and do some shopping. My girls are always very well behaved and never ran away from me. Usually, we always held hands walking around when it's an area with many people. On this day, the mall was almost empty. Still, the girls stayed on my hands. I noticed a man passing me. He looked at my daughters with a very stern look that gave me a bad vibe. I just brushed it off and kept walking. We wanted to go to a shoe store. This store had a very cute play area that the girls liked to go to. As we entered the store, they asked if they can run ahead to the play area. I could see it right while walking in, as it was at the end of the wide walkway. I told them yes, and they took off. At that exact moment, the same strange man burst into the store and speedwalks past me towards my daughters. It didn't even take me a second to realize that he was up to no good. He was absolutely focused on getting them. Fast. I instantly started to yell while running past him. I said, "Girls, come here now." I am never very stern, but they sensed that I was serious. He got thrown off by my yelling, and I got to my daughters before he could. Turned around, and he was running out the store. I was so shaken. A store worker came up to me and asked what happened, and I told her. I waited for a while, until I felt like myself again, and left the store and mall with both of my babies in my arms.
This particular experience was not as obviously life-threatening, but was a doozy of a night. I'll let you be the judge. Background: this happened about 7 years ago. I'm female, 5'2" and petite, so I try to be extra careful because I've had some pretty close calls. This night, I clearly had a lapse in judgment. Also, I don't do hard drugs, but during my college years, I drank a fair amount and smoked copious amounts of marijuana. Presenting my date from hell. I waited tables for 7 years, working my way through college. I served all kinds of people during that time and grew very comfortable working with the general public, playing up small talk, putting on a friendly demeanor, and more importantly, waiting the hell out of some tables. I was good at my job, so I enjoyed my work most of the time, aside from the occasional jerk customer. My restaurant was right off the highway, next to several large hotels. Most ran between $90 and $150 a night. Not the worst, but not the best. I'd often get tables who were staying at these hotels whom would walk over for a meal more than one night in a row if they were staying longer than one day. This is how I met Bob. Bob came in on a busy night, sat quietly by himself, and required minimal effort. He ordered only cobbler and coffee, which he ate quickly. I sent him on his way, to go coffee in hand, with very minimal small talk. I noticed he smiled at me, eyes lingering a bit longer than normal, and immediately knew he was interested in me. Most women know the look. Despite this, he left without saying anything else, and I thought that was the end of it. He also left me a fat tip. The next night at work, he's back. He's requested my section this time. Again, orders modestly, no actual meal, leaves a great tip, but barely says more to me than a few words it takes to place his order. Cool. Minimal effort, maximum reward. I dig it. We repeat this 3 nights in a row, until finally at the end of night 3, he opens up and tells me a bit about himself. He is staying at the hotel next door for his job, working on cell phone towers and telephone poles. He will be in the area for several months. He showed me a picture on his phone of him in gear at the top of a very high tower, and this story seems to check out. He wraps all this info up by asking for my phone number. I did find him relatively attractive. Not crazy good looking, but he had a nice smile. He was barrel-chested, a big dude with curly hair that was shaggy but nice. The kind of curls women pay big money for. I was a bit lonely at the time, and he seemed normal, so I agreed to give him my number. Over the next few days, we made small talk, but nothing substantial. Looking back, aside from his employment, I learned almost nothing about Bob during this conversation period. Nothing that sticks with me anyway. It was all meaningless small talk via text. Finally, I agreed to grab a drink with him on the 4th of July weekend, and having no prior plans for the holiday, I was excited to have something to do. Usually I would have insisted to meet him somewhere public to protect myself, but I had been interacting with him for over a week, so my guard was dropping. Stupid, right? He suggested we smoke prior to hitting the bar. I liked the idea, and not wanting to go to his hotel room for obvious reasons, I reluctantly agreed my place would probably be the best since it was closer to downtown. I gave him my apartment information, my 1-bedroom apartment where I live alone. This was stupid of me. The night arrives and he's punctual. Both of us have some weed. We are very well supplied. It's important to mention I am also a very experienced smoker and had lots of different methods for us to choose from. Pipes, steamrollers, papers, blunt wraps, etc. I ask his preferred method, and he says bong. Of course, the one thing I don't have. Mine had recently broken. I tell him so and suggest a blunt or a bowl, but he insists he wants a bong rip. I tell him I don't know where we'd get a bong this late. He insists he knows where and must have a bong rip, so I allow him to ferry me to a Shadler gas station in the area where he purchases not only a large glass bong, but also a grinder and lighter, even though I have us well supplied at home. We return. He gets his bong hits. I find the whole thing odd, but brush it off and enjoy my buzz. Bob has me roll a joint after several bong hits. I finish and go to light it, and he stops me. "Let's smoke that on the way to the bar," he says. I live less than 10 minutes drive from the bar, and tell him so. I also tell him that it's a holiday weekend, so cops will be out in full force, and that I think we should just play it safe. He steamrolls my objections and insists everything will be fine, and I'm worrying for nothing. I tell him I'm not comfortable with it, and he just repeats himself. Red flag. Apparently, I have no choice in the matter, so we leave and head to the bars. Joints a burnin'. We arrive safely. Bob parks in a very obvious pay-to-park lot. These lots are heavily patrolled by tow companies, but are usually only staffed by an automatic kiosk machine where you can pay. However, since it was a holiday weekend, there was an actual person attendant as well. Bob parks and we begin to walk towards the bar, making no move towards the machine to pay. I warn him that the lot is heavily towed, but he once again steamrolls over my warning and tells me it'll be fine. FYI, I knew this would not be fine. He would 100% get towed if he didn't pay before he went inside. The parking attendant comes jogging over to us, trying to get our attention, as I try unsuccessfully to convince him paying is not optional. But he never stops walking. Finally, the attendant neared us enough to say in our direction, "Hey man, you gotta pay to park or you'll get towed." Without an ounce of humor in his voice. Cold, chilling, and completely unlike anything I've heard come out of his mouth all night. He replied just loudly enough to be heard by the man. "If I get towed, I'll stab you." What the? My legs almost give out in shock. My brain clicks that I may be in danger. The parking attendant mutters something about towing and walks off. I decided right then and there that he is definitely not my ride anymore. All bets are off because he just threatened to stab the parking attendant. I needed to ditch him. Somehow. Safely. I take a step away, putting distance between us, but keep pace with him as we walk towards the bar. I ask, "What was up with that? You know you're definitely getting towed now that you threatened that guy." "I was just joking," he says. "You didn't say it like a joke, and he definitely didn't laugh," I said. "It wasn't serious," Bob says. I let him know that I didn't like his behavior. Now, in an increasingly crowded area, the witnesses made me bolder. I developed a plan in my head, hoping I could discreetly phone a cab from the ladies' room and run for it, using the crowd as cover. He knew where I lived. No fixing that. But hopefully his car being towed would slow him down a bit. Bob continued to insist it had all been one big hilarious joke as we entered the bar, that I had just misunderstood, that I couldn't take a joke. I knew better. His voice had been deadly serious and ice cold. My instincts told me he had been serious about this threat. I continued planning my escape in my head while he testified his innocence. I'd need to bide my time till the right moment, so I waited, uncomfortably, and suddenly aware of how he'd been acting erratically all night, and I was just now noticing. I feel my gut twist inside me. I was scared now, and I felt like an idiot for brushing off the other warning signs. He clearly wasn't balanced, but if he wanted to kill me, you'd think he'd already have done it, right? In the safety of a one-bedroom apartment, right? I hung my hopes on this thought. We entered the bar. It's obvious I'm miffed by the encounter in the parking lot. He never did pay, and Bob seems annoyed by this. Bob puts a card down on the bar and starts a tab. We order drinks. I take mine directly from the bartender and watch it like it's my job. Bob fiddling with his phone when suddenly he grunts in annoyance. Its battery has died. No, he proceeds to tell me that he was in the middle of transferring money between his accounts when his phone died, that he was putting money on the card that the bartender was holding for our tab, but since the battery died before he was finished, there's no money on that card. I immediately offered to pay for the drinks. He could take back his card, I'd pay cash, no big deal. Already, I just wanted the night to be over. "There's an ATM in the other bar right across the street. I can get cash there. I don't want you to pay. We can go to the other bar real quick. We don't even have to close out this tab. We will just come right back and pay it," Bob said. I've been inside the other bar many times. I am way more comfortable there than I am in this bar. I'm even friends with one of the bar packs, so I'm hoping perhaps he can help me escape my nightmare date as gracefully as possible with minimal risk. I send up a silent prayer he's working tonight and agree wholeheartedly to just dip right on out of there, tab unpaid, debit card left behind. He's coming right back to pay anyway, right? We go to the other bar. The ladies' room is right next to the ATM, and as he's using it, I excuse myself and slip into the ladies' room. I must be the luckiest chick in the world, because my friend Heather, bless her soul, came stumbling out of the stall behind me as I was staring hopelessly into the mirror above the sinks, silently cursing my own stupidity and wishing anywhere else but in my current predicament. I was saved. Relief washed over me in a wave, and I ran into her arms and hugged her violently, telling her all about my weird date, how he'd been erratic all night and threatened to stab the parking attendant not 30 minutes ago in this creepy voice, and most importantly, how I didn't want him to drive me home anymore, how I just wanted to get away, but needed a ride. Heather turned out to be out with her husband and his friends. Some of them I knew. We made a plan. She'd walk with me to their table, and I'd sit with them. They'd keep an eye on me as I explained to Bob that I wasn't feeling a connection and wanted to finish the rest of the night out with my friends. They'd keep me safe and drive me home later. We planned the whole speech. But I never had to use it. I walked out of the bathroom door, and he was gone. I didn't see him again that night, nor did he text me. Heather filled everybody in, and the guys were real sweet about it, putting me in the center seat so I was obscured from the view of my passerbys. A sick feeling in my gut tells me he stuck around and watched me join the boys at Heather's table and made me even sit extra low in my chair. My friends took me all the way to my door that night after the bar, making sure I was safely inside. Abandoned on my coffee table was the glass bong, brand new grinder, and lighter Bob insisted upon buying. Paid probably $60 for, then took maybe 3 hits off. The worst part was when I walked into my bathroom after kicking off my heels, having just got home. I noticed a small glass thing on the side of my bathtub, which I noticed as I sat on the toilet to pee. I picked it up. It was about the size of a tube of lip balm, but fatter and rounder. When I inspected it closely, I found a thimble full of loose white powder on the inside. It seemed to be contained to one side, while the other half was empty and had a hole on top. I examined it closely. I was pretty sure it was Coke, but I'd never seen anything like that little glass contraption before. Realizing Bob had used my bathroom and it had to be his, I freaked out thinking he'd surely come back for his drugs if he left them behind on accident. He never did though, and I tucked away the glass powder, filling things out of paranoia deep in my closet, afraid if he did return for it, I'd better have it. After a month, I tossed it. The whole thing baffled me. If he was short on money, why'd he insist on making a special trip to buy something not really needed? Had he ever returned to pay the tab? Did he leave me stranded because I was obviously turned off by his threat? Did he get embarrassed and just leave? He certainly didn't seem like the type, but clearly I made a misjudgment about him somewhere. Was he just an impossibly coked out dude? Like, what the heck was that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because it's baffled me for years. Bob went radio silent for a month, then texted, "Hey," 3 times in 1 week. I didn't respond. The next week, he showed up at my work, requesting my section again. I was shocked to see him, and he'd spotted me already, so I decided to speak to him at least, but give the table away to another server. He acted as if nothing ever happened, asked me why I didn't respond to his text. I told him I was busy. He said he'd like to hang out again. I said I didn't think so. Then he asked, why not? Then I said, you left me at the other bar. That's not exactly what happened, Bob replied. Well, regardless, you were my ride. You knew that. You didn't try texting or calling me, and you've got my number. You were gone when I came out of the bathroom, but luckily I found some friends, so it didn't matter, I said. I walked away at that point and let someone else get him his cobbler. He didn't try to contradict my statement that he'd left me stranded at the bar, at the very least, nor did he mention the cocaine he left in my bathroom. Bob continued to text me occasionally for the next 3 years. Every 3 to 6 months or so, a 1-word text came through. Hey, testing the waters. I never answered. I keep his number saved in my phone, so I don't accidentally answer a text from him, just in case, should he ever try again. So, Bob, let's not meet ever again, you freaking coked out weirdo.
When my husband and I were first married, we lived in an inexpensive apartment complex with our 3 cats. Only one was allowed. Soon after we moved in, a note was slid under our door. The lettering looked like someone had cut out letters from a magazine and pasted them on paper, but it was handwritten. It said, "You are in violation of the 5.2 clause of lease with multiple pet animals. I hear the noise from your sound-producing machines in my apartment," etc., etc., with Bible quotes and more lease citations. But imagine this with creepy pasted lettering. What the actual hell? So the author of the note lived directly above us, and I was especially scared because the only way to know how many cats we had was to see them from the inside of the apartment. These notes continued with increasingly weird wording and threats. Once I was in the living room and watched a note slip from under the door. Talk about panic. I made sure the deadbolt was locked, but still felt terrified. A few days later, we found out we weren't his only targets, and that the police had been called. When they entered his apartment, it was completely bare of any furniture or belongings. They found him hiding in his closet naked. He was hauled off, and we didn't see him again, but assumed and hoped he was out of our lives. I swear that this story is true. I couldn't invent the sound-producing machine bit, even if I tried.
I posted here about a week or two ago, but have another story when I was about 15 or 16. I figured it's a decent cautionary tale and might as well post it here. So it was the middle of a summer day, and I was home with my mother. Just a regular day until I hear a loud, incomprehensible yelling from outside. I look out and see this strange old guy in the middle of the street yelling. I had always lived in this suburb and the surrounding area. I didn't recognize this guy, so I tell my mom I'm going to see what's going on, and I head outside. I walk up to this guy and ask him if something's wrong. I don't think he was homeless, but he was pretty messily dressed. Pretty sure he was a little bit drunk, but he tells me he can't find the bus stop. This surprised me, as the bus stop was literally just straight down the street in the left turn from where we were. Maybe a 5-minute walk at most. I try to explain where he should go, and we kind of argue for a bit before he asks me if I can walk him there. At this point, he was so loud and obnoxious that I figured I'd do it just to get him out of the neighborhood. So I agreed to walk him 5 minutes away down the street. Fast forward, and he's asking me questions about my age and what I was doing with my life. So I get to the bus stop, and as I'm about to leave, he suddenly changes his story and says he needs to get to his house and didn't know where to go. I had a red flag go off, but the street where the address he gave me was about another 5 minutes away. Once again, I was stupid and overly confident. I lived in this area all my life. I was a 16-year-old, 180-pound muscular, almost man in my prime. I figured I was untouchable, and it was the middle of a sunny day. I agreed to walk him to his house. In the back of my mind, I was weirded out by the change from the bus stop to a house. We lived in a nice suburb, and this guy did not seem to fit the bill. Anyway, as we approached the house, his questions got strange. He started going on about being lonely and how no one visits him. Then he drops a bomb on me about asking my mom if he could live with us and he could be the man of the house. I uncomfortably laughed, and we finally got to the driveway of his place. My creep meter was going off, and then it hit an all-time high as he tried to convince me he was too weak to get into his house. That was my nope signal. Somehow during this, I shoot my best friend, and at the time, neighbor, a quick text to the address and telling him to call the cops if I don't text him back in 10 minutes. He starts getting aggressive with me, and I tell him there's no way I'm helping him into his house. He then starts trying to offer me alcohol as a reward for helping him. His persistence was off-putting, and I didn't really understand the danger I was in until later. I was extremely unnerved. All of a sudden, this dude bolts into his house, and back in the span of a minute, with a water bottle to give to me. He shoved it into my hands and grabbed my arms, trying to make me promise to return and visit him. I lied and said I would. Only then did he release my arm, and I got the heck out of there and dumped the bottle of water onto the grass. I never saw him again, which made me happy, but was also strange. This neighborhood is extremely small. He must have been staying with someone at that house. Either way, I can't complain about never running into that creep. If you're ever in that sort of situation and getting red flags, just walk away. Don't try to be nice. I took a bunch of risks, assuming I was invincible, and it was the middle of the day, along with this occurring in my neighborhood. Being young doesn't make you invincible. Scary stranger, let's never meet again.
This is something that I've kept to myself for a long time, but figured that now, years later, I could probably tell my story safely. On a Saturday night, I was on my way to the bus stop to pick up a friend. The plan was to have a drink together. In our city centre, a not-so-healthy-looking guy asked me if he could borrow my phone to make a quick call. I denied by saying that I don't have a data plan. I lied, and continued to walk to the bus stop. This guy followed me all the way. It seemed as if he was also waiting for the bus. Then my friend called. I took my phone and answered my friend's call. While holding my phone to my ear, this weird guy stood right behind me. I was not fully aware of this, but I felt like I was being watched and held my phone tightly. Then, that guy tried to grab my phone from behind me while I was calling. I'm not sure why I did that, but I turned around and asked, "What are you doing?" The guy answered my question with, "I thought you had no data plan, now give me that phone." To which I replied with, "No way!" The guy tried to grab my phone again. He was unarmed, and I decided to run and call the police. The truth is, before the robbery attempt happened, I accidentally dropped my phone and the screen cracked really badly. I had no money to buy a new phone, and I told my insurance I dropped the phone during this robbery attempt. This guy got caught fairly quickly, because he was already in the police system. He paid for my new phone. Impertinent stranger, let's not meet again, or you'll be losing even more money to my luxury.
Hey everyone. I've been reading these stories for probably a year or so now, and have been wanting to share a story of my own, but simply did not have the motivation to write it out, if I'm being honest. Please bear with me, as I am by no means a great writer, and this is the first ever post on Reddit. Anyway, this took place in a somewhat bigger city in the Canadian prairies. The city in question has always had a lot of vagrants, but has only been dubbed dangerous in most recent years. I was 5 or 6 at the time, and lived with my father and my older brother. My dad was always the opposite of a helicopter parent. We would basically do whatever we wanted, as long as it wasn't annoying or inconvenient to him. We liked that bit of freedom, I guess, but too much of it can definitely be trouble, as I learned one summer day. My brother and I had each gotten our $5 allowance that day, and at the time, our favorite thing to spend it on were 5-cent candies from the convenience store that was roughly 7 or 8 blocks away. I wanted to immediately go and buy some, but my brother did not feel like going. I asked my dad if I would be alright if I went alone, and assured him I'd be straight there and straight back. He mumbled that it was fine. So, I carry on my merry way, thoughts of Bazooka Joe gum and sour candies racing through my head, with not a care in the world. The walk was fairly straightforward. You'd walk a long way down the street I lived on, which eventually led to a main road that led off from the highway, coming from the south. The convenience store was on the main road, and I did not have to cross the busy street to get to it. I did, however, have to walk past a slightly wooded area that was about 15 to 20 feet back from the sidewalk. I'll try to draw a map to better describe this layout, as it's important to the story. So I make it to the store without incident, and leave with my goodies in hand and a smile on my face. Just as I'm about to start my journey home, I'm approached by a friendly-looking man with glasses and dark, almost shoulder-length hair. He flashes a friendly smile and introduces himself to me. I, as I am naive, am quick to trust this gentleman and tell him my first name. We chat briefly, and he says to me, "Hey, I got something really cool to show you," and waves an arm invitingly towards the wooded area off to my right. I hesitated briefly, and he assured me it would be really quick, so I went with him. He had me lead the way along the path between the wooded area and a fence that separated it from the residences on the other side. So we had a fence on the left side of us and trees on the right side, and on the other side of those trees was a sidewalk with a busy street. After walking for a couple of minutes, we happened upon a big, more disheveled-looking man sleeping in a pile of leaves. Hector, my new friend, walked over to him and booted his foot. "Roy, wake up. he said, losing his friendly tone. "I found one." Roy slowly sat up, rubbed his eyes, then lumbered up to his feet. Something about the second guy seemed off. He lazily eyed me up and down, and then reached into his left pocket of his dirty jeans. This finally unsettled me, so I looked over at Hector for reassurance. Instead, my eyes locked with what I can only describe as those of a predator. His features had twisted into a menacing, sadistic grin. Panicked, and with the two men closing in on me, I ran the only way I could think to, into the trees. As I dodged branches and jumped over gnarly stumps and roots, I managed a couple of quick glances over my shoulder and saw that they were in hot pursuit, though their size difference put some distance between them and myself. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, I finally emerged on the grassy terrace and kept running until I reached the sidewalk. Then past that into the side of the road, screaming and waving my arms wildly. A woman quickly stopped her car and rolled down her window to ask what was wrong. I managed to say something about some men chasing me, and I saw her looking over my shoulder. I turned around as well and saw the two men lumbering back into the trees. Once they were out of sight, she asked me if I'd like her to call the police or drive me somewhere. As I was in no rush to trust a stranger again, I told her I would walk. I think I lied about the distance. She seemed reluctant, but let me go. I made it home without incident. I never told my dad. Regrettably, I didn't want him to get angry or restrict my freedom, or even my older brother. I have no idea what their intentions were, but to the men in the trees in that northern community, let's not ever meet again.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I want to give a huge thank you to Pastor McCreepy for his narrations today. Please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, and go over to his channel to check out his awesome work. But for now, I'm going to leave you with a few words from Pastor McCreepy.
Hey guys, Mitch, aka Pastor McCreepy here. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the stories I read today. You can head over to my YouTube channel and check out the other stories I've read. The thing that sets me apart from others on YouTube is my voice. Since I was young, people have always told me that I have a radio voice, but I never really had any ideas on what to do with it. I also have always loved everything creepy and scary. If you like my voice, and if you like my channel, please subscribe. I would also love for you to leave a comment. I make it a point to attempt to respond to all the messages that people leave. I also appreciate any feedback, because I am still learning and am open to improving. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, if that's your sort of thing. The links are on my channel. I would like to send a thanks to Mortis for giving me this opportunity to collaborate with him. He's been awesome with me and has an amazing channel here. So once again, guys, I really appreciate you listening, and I hope to hear from you guys soon. See you later.